Welcome to YouTestMe GetCertified. My name is Alex. I will be walking you through this demonstration of our online examination platform. We will enter the application as an administrator because this is the user that has all of the privileges to access all of the functionalities within the system. Once we enter the application, we are navigated to the home page of YouTestMe GetCertified. On the left side of the screen, you can see the search bar. On the right side of the screen, you can see the notifications bar with all of the information relevant for this particular user at this particular time. And at the top of the screen, you can see the main menu of the application with the main modules of the application. So we have a module for managing and organizing users. We have a module for creating and managing tests, and the same for the surveys. We also have a module for organizing the learning experience of your students through training courses. And we have the report section and the system section. The main focus of this demonstration will be the module for managing tests, but we will also cover the module for managing users and the report section. So let's navigate to the page for managing users. We are presented with the list of all users, and I will walk you through the 4 ways of creating new users in YouTestMe GetCertified. If we navigate to the panel for creating a new user, we can start creating users one by one by filling out this form and clicking on the Save button. We also have the option to approve or decline registration requests. Over here in this panel for registration requests, we can select any of the users that applied and sent their registration request, and we can approve or decline it. In the system settings, we can also allow users to self-register, meaning that we do not have to approve anything. If you do not want to enter users one by one and do not want to approve anything, you can just navigate to the list of all users and use our predefined Excel templates to upload several hundreds of users at once. These templates are available throughout the application, meaning that you can upload users, questions, tests. Any of the major entities in the system has its own module for uploading using predefined Excel templates. The final way of entering users into YouTestMe GetCertified is by synchronizing with an external system. Now we can synchronize with any system. All we need is the specification related to that particular system, and our development team will do the rest. We can also adapt our single sign-on mechanism to work in a manner that suits your organization, meaning that we can adjust it according to your specification. Now, once you have all of your users in the system, you may want to organize them into user groups. To do that, we need to navigate to the page for managing user groups. If you take a look at the left side of the screen, you can see all of the groups in this example. So the user groups have a hierarchical structure, meaning that one user group can have as many subgroups as necessary. These subgroups, they can have their subgroups. So you can mimic any kind of structure that you want. If we open one of these groups, we can see the basic information about it. We can see its members. We can also see its managers, and we can add new members and new managers. Now, a single user can be a member of any number of user groups. He can be a manager in one and a member in another one. But the most important thing about user groups is that you can use them to send tests to the users. So you can choose to create a testing session and send it to the group members of the group that you are managing. Later on, you can examine the statistics associated with your group members. Over here, we can see the average of our group members on 5 different tests. We can also add any of the group members to this graphical representation and compare their score with the average of the group. This is only one of the reports that is embedded in this particular page. However, they are all centralized in the report section. You may see some of them throughout the application, and these are the ones that we felt are most useful and should be available in all of these modules. Now, you have all of your users, they are organized in user groups. Before we start creating questions and tests that these users will take, we'll check the roles and permissions module. Now, this is an important module related to the users because security roles actually represent a set of permissions that define what the users with those particular security roles can do. Each user needs to have a security role. For example, an administrator has all of the permissions enabled. He can access all of the modules in the application, access all of the functionalities. However, if we take a look at some of the security roles that we see in this panel here, for example, a question manager, we can see that we can specify the exact activities that we want for the users with these security role to be allowed. Question manager, for example, can only access the application, cannot see anything about the users, cannot change personal information, cannot modify and create user groups, but can create and modify question pools, meaning that this particular security role is intended for the users that need to create questions and create test content, but are not able to create tests themselves. Now, once we have all of our users defined, organized into user groups, once we have defined all of the security roles, because you can create new security roles and just select the specific combination of permissions that you want for that particular role. Once we have done all of that, we can start creating questions, because now we have the users that will take these tests that we will create from these questions. Now, on the left side of the screen, you can see all of the question pools in this example. The first thing that you may have noticed is the similarity between the question pools and user groups. So they both have hierarchical structure. Question pools can have subpools. These subpools can have their subpools. Usually a question pool relates to a specific subject area, and this is very useful because after the test attempt, the student and the instructors get the results broken down by question pools, meaning by subject areas. So let's open one of these question pools. We will get the basic information about it, but most importantly, we can see all of the questions related to this particular pool. We can edit these questions, we can delete the questions, we can add new questions. Our system currently offers 9 question types: single choice questions, multiple choice questions, essay, ordering, fill in the blanks, true, false, matching, matrix, and open-ended questions. All of these question types can be graded automatically by the system, except for the essay questions, simply because of the nature of those questions. Let's open a multiple choice question and edit it, so you can see all of the parameters that you can modify and change and adjust in a single question. So the panel for editing questions is divided in 3 parts: question settings, question text, and answers. Let's start from the top. Now, question settings are related to question metadata. So you can define the number of points, the duration of this particular question. You can set a difficulty label and decide if the question is easy, medium, or hard. This will come in handy when generating tests, because you can generate tests with multiple test versions simply by specifying how many easy, medium, and hard questions do you want from specific question pools. One other option that is important here is the scoring method. So you can choose if you want to define correct and incorrect answers. You can also choose to define answer weight. This means that you will be able to set a specific number of points that each of these answers carry. You can also set negative points. Another option is to define a correct combination or combinations of answers, meaning that you can specify that, for example, a combination of the answer number 1 and answer number 3 is the correct one. It carries 5 points. After that, you can also specify that the combination of the answer number 1 and answer number 4 is also correct combination but carries 2 points. You can also choose to grade questions manually. For demonstrational purposes, let's stick with defining correct and incorrect answers. You can add as many answers as you want, and you can add as many questions as you want in question pools. Now over here, we have 2 correct answers defined and 4 incorrect answers defined. And this is a good time to introduce the answer generator, the first cheating prevention mechanism that our system offers, among many others. This option allows you to define the number of correct and incorrect answers that will be displayed to the students once they reach this particular question. This means that 2 students sitting next to each other while doing an exam, even if they get the same question, will probably not get the same combination of answers displayed to them. As you can see, you can also add feedback for each answer. This message will appear after a student submits a question if this particular answer was selected. You also have some other options here to add assistances. For example, you can allow students additional time to answer a question. You can allow them to eliminate one wrong answer or to see some kind of help message that a question creator left for them. Now, if you do not want to change and modify all of these options for each question, you can simply navigate back to the questions panel and use our predefined Excel templates that will allow you to upload several hundreds of questions at once, simply by entering all of the information that you saw in the question editor in an Excel file, in a single Excel file for all of the questions. Before we move on to the test creation process, I want to briefly mention one option that is worth mentioning, and that's question branching. Our system offers tailoring the test-taking process by defining subsequent questions for all of the answers in a single question, or only some of the answers. In this particular example, if we open the structure here, we can see that we have one root question, 3 answers, and each answer has a subsequent question defined for it. You can add as many questions as you want in a single branch, and once a student answers all of the questions associated with the answer that he selected in the root question, he will be navigated back to the main path. Okay, so now that you have all of your questions defined and organized using question pools, we can navigate to the page for creating new test. As you can see, we have several steps when creating a new test. And the first step requires defining the test name, its description, instructions, and choosing if we want to create a test with or without sections. So let's give it a name. Description and instructions are optional. You can use the instructions that you previously created, and they will appear in a pop-up dialog that you can see over here prior to the test-taking process. Students need to acknowledge the message that you left for them This can be some kind of confidentiality notice or specific rules associated with this test. Students need to acknowledge this before they can move on to the test taking process. Now, the most important parameter here is the one related to the test sections. So if you want to create a test with sections, this means that you will have tests within a single test. So each test section will have its own set of rules, its own set of questions, its own passing mark if you choose. Basically, you will divide a single test into multiple tests, and each section will represent that test within a test. We will create a test with two sections to demonstrate two main test creation methods: manual creation and generating a test. So let's go to the second step. Over here, we can define the settings related to the test as a whole. So we can choose if you want to define time for each section or time for the test as a whole. So let's say that this particular test will last for 1 hour. We can choose if we want to show the report immediately after the student finishes the test on manager's approval, meaning that a test manager needs to approve that the students can now see the report, which can also happen never, for example, if the test manager chooses to withhold the results. We can also enable real-time grading, meaning that the score that is displayed to the students will be updated as soon as that particular student submits each question. Now, if we select immediately after finishing, we can choose if we want to show score only or score and details about each question, and with all of the answers, correct and incorrect, displayed, and the answers that the user selected. If we want to show all of these details, we may want to limit this. Say, okay, you can see all of the data, but only for 5 minutes after you complete the test attempt. We can also choose to automatically log out the candidate from the application, and we can also require for a student or a candidate to update the personal information prior to the test taking process. This can come in handy if you want to generate specific reports that have demographic data included in it. You also have an alternative, and to create a section that carries 0 points where you will gather the exact data that you need. For official tests, we recommend enabling browser lockdown, which means that the candidate will not be able to cut, copy, save, or print anything that is visible in the screen during the test taking process. Also, the entire test attempt will be in the full screen mode, and if the student tries to minimize that, their test attempt will be terminated. For official tests, you may also want to enable internal network, meaning that the students that are inside of this network will be the only ones that can actually take the test. If a student is outside of this network that is defined in the system settings, they won't be able to access this particular test. They will be able to access the application, but won't be able to start the test. And also, you can choose to enable proctoring. This will allow you to examine the video recordings with all of the suspicious behaviors flagged, and all of the times when these behaviors occurred will also be available to you in a PDF report that is generated by the system automatically. System will receive the information from the student's web camera, microphone, and also from the student's screen, and will flag all of the suspicious behaviors like the background noise or unauthorized face visible in front of the camera. For practice tests, you may want to disable all of these options and enable test continuation and test retaking. This means that the students will be able to take pause during the test attempt and retake the test as many times as they want without the need for the test manager to explicitly reset their attempt. Once you have configured all of these settings, you can go to the next step and add an optional certificate to your test. You can use our certificate designer to create the certificate over here. However, you can also use the certificates that you created previously. Students that pass the test will be awarded with this particular certificate. Now in the next step, we are navigated to the page for creating and editing test sections. As I mentioned, we will create 2 sections. You may notice some similarities with the test creation process because, as I mentioned, test sections are essentially tests within a single test. So in the first step, we just need to define the name of a section. Optionally, we can add description and instructions or the introduction to this particular section. The message that we leave here will be visible to the students before they access the section and as long as they are inside that particular section. Over here, we can define test section settings. So we can choose if we want to display questions all on one page or one question per page. We can choose if we want to require from students to answer all of the questions before they can submit the section. We can allow students to skip the question. We can disable going backwards in test section. We can disable or enable revisiting this particular section. If answers contain answer feedback, we can choose if we want to allow that to be visible or not, and we can also choose if we want to allow question metadata to be visible, meaning the number of points that the question carries, for example. In the next step, we need to define the section creation method, and we can choose between 2 options essentially, to add questions manually or to generate this particular section. We will add questions manually for this first section. As you can see, you can also upload the entire section using an Excel template. When you're creating a section manually, you need to handpick the questions, and the exact questions that you choose will be the ones that will be displayed to all of the students. Now you can create questions over here during the section creation process, but we recommend importing them from pools. So you just need to select a question pool that you want to use, for example, general knowledge, and you pick the exact questions that you want. You can use as many question pools as you want and choose the exact questions that you need, or assign all of the questions from a particular question pool. Now, once you have selected all of the questions that you want to use, you can choose the order of the questions, or you can randomize it and randomize the answers as well. In this step, you can review the settings related to this particular section, and you can choose if you want to save the section or create another one. So let's add another one. We'll call it section number 2. We will skip the settings, and I will explain the process of generating a section or a test. This option allows you to specify how many questions from specific question pools do you want in each version of this particular section. This means that the system will generate different versions of this same section that will all be unique, but will be comparable because they will all use the same ratio based on the parameters that you define. And they will all have the same ratio of easy, medium, and hard questions from specific question pools. So let's add some questions. And as you can see, once we select a question pool, we cannot choose the exact questions. We can only choose how many easy, medium, and hard questions do we want from these specific question pools. We added one, let's add another one. You can add as many questions as you want. Once you have added all of the question pools that you want to use and define the ratio of easy, medium, and hard questions, you can move on to the next step and define the number of points that each of these categories carry. Let's say that medium questions carry 3 points, hard questions carry 5 points, easy questions carry 1 point, and let's add a penalty of 2 points for hard questions. Over here you can also choose if you want to generate test versions dynamically, meaning that each student will get a unique newly generated test version, or if you want to specify the exact number of unique versions that will be randomly assigned to the students. We recommend generating different test versions. In the next step, you can just review the settings and choose to create another section or save and continue. Since we created the two sections that we wanted, we will go back to the test creation process. The last important step in this process is to create a specific grading configuration. You have a couple of things that you can define over here. The mandatory passing mark is the passing mark related to the whole test. But you can also define a passing mark for each of the sections that you created. For example, we can define that a passing mark for section number 1 is 71% and the passing is required, meaning that the student needs to pass this first section and also needs to pass the exam as a whole. We can set a passing mark for the section number 2 as well. However, we can choose not to enable this option here and not to make the passing mark required here, meaning that this will be only a descriptive parameter. If we scroll down, you can also choose to create a specific combination of test sections, and some of our clients want to group specific sections into one single entity that has a passing mark of its own. What you can also do is to navigate to the question pools that you used when creating these sections and create a passing mark for each of them as well. These will be of a descriptive nature. Once you have defined your grading configuration, you can just go to the next step, review all of the settings related to this test that you created, and move on to the final step where you will finish the test creation wizard. After the test creation, we are navigated to the page for managing tests. If you take a look at the left side of the screen, you can see all of the tests that you are managing, and the test that is open by default is the one that we just created. Before students can actually take this test, we need to define its testing sessions. A single test can have as many testing sessions as necessary. So let's create one so you have a better understanding of what they actually represent. Let's call this one a Toronto session. We can associate it with a specific location. In this case, we'll associate it with Toronto. Testing locations actually represent arbitrary parameters that we defined in the system. So let's briefly skip to that part of the application. Over here you can see that we defined 5 different locations. To create another location, all you need to do is to enter its name, associate it with a specific time zone, and add an optional description. What you can also do, you can assign proctors that are associated with this particular location, meaning that each time a testing session is being associated with this location, proctors from that particular location can monitor those test attempts in that particular session. Testing locations actually represent anything that you want them to represent. They can be cities, states, buildings, parts of a single city, anything that you want. They are useful because later on you can examine the results of the test as a whole broken down by specific testing locations. Okay, moving back to the testing session that we are creating. So what we need to do is to define its availability period. Let's say that this one will be available throughout the July. What we can do, we can associate a specific session with a specific user group. For example, let's say we'll associate it with human resources. And not only that, we will also enable self-enrollment. This means that all of the members of the group called human resources will be able to start this test by themselves, so you do not need to explicitly assign them as test candidates. However, they will only be able to do so during this specific availability period that we defined. If we disable this option to allow self-enrollment, we can choose the exact candidates from this particular group that we want to include in this particular testing session. We can do the same with training courses, meaning that we can associate a testing session with a specific training course. So all of the candidates from that specific training course will be able to take the test during this particular time that we defined. We can also choose to lock a session, meaning that the students that do not have this password that we define here won't be able to access the test. Let's save the session, and as you can see, this module allows great flexibility, meaning that you can define the exact set of candidates that will take the test at an exact time with the specific rules, meaning that they must be from a specific user group or need to have a specific password or can self-enroll or are handpicked. So for example, if you want to create a global session, for example, you can do that. Let's call it a global session. It's not associated with any location, and its availability is for the next, let's say, 10 years. It's not associated with any user group, with any training, and self-enrollment is enabled. So all of the students that have the account in the system will be able to start this particular test. Once we have defined all of the testing sessions that we want, all we need to do is to publish a test, and the students can now start taking this particular test. To demonstrate the test taking process, we will enter the application as a student. The first thing that you will notice is that the student does not have access to all of the functionalities that the administrator had. So all of the options from the main menu are gone, except for the help section. And the main panel for students actually is the My Assignments panel. In this panel, the student can see all of the assignments, meaning all of the tests, surveys, and training courses that he's scheduled to take or has already attempted. Now we can see the test that we created because of the global session that we created, so this student can actually self-enroll to this particular test. But for demonstrational purposes, we will start this main demo test. Once we click on the Start button, we are presented with the instructions and the basic information about this test. We need to acknowledge them before we can start the test-taking process. The first thing that we see as a student once we start the test is the introduction panel for the first section of this exam. Now, this exam contains 3 sections, and this is the introduction panel of the first section. Over here in this first section, we will see all of the questions displayed on one page. We will see how the demographic questions with 0 points look. We will also see this section with unlimited time, and this section has a condition that we need to answer all of the questions before we can submit it. So let's start the section. And this is the test-taking panel. So we have the central content with the questions. If they are displayed all on one page, like here, we can see all of them. In the next section, we will see how it looks when they are displayed one per page. On the right side of the screen, we can see the question summary box. This summary box is being updated as soon as we answer any of these questions. And we also have the notes that contain the instructions for this section, but can also be modified. So you can leave any kind of message here, and the instructor will be able to see these notes and examine these notes to check your thought process. Now, these are single choice questions that we see here, meaning that if we select one answer and then another one, the previous one will be deselected. And if we try to finish this section, we actually cannot do that because this section contains a condition that we need to provide answers to all of the questions before submitting this section. So if we scroll down, we can see a matrix question. We need to answer it. This particular question type has one statement with several items that need to be evaluated on a Likert scale. Once we do that, the question summary box is updated. As you can see, we use these shapes so we can help color-blinded people to navigate through the question summary box as well. And now that we have answered all of the questions, we can submit this section. What happens next is that we are presented with the introduction for the next section, the second one out of 3 that we have in this exam. This one is intended to demonstrate branching of test questions, 1 question per page, section format, and timing per test section. So let's start it. The first thing that we see is that we have a timer here, and we have half an hour to complete this particular section. So the first question contains several answers, and if we select one of them, you would think that we will be navigated to the second question, but no, actually this answer contains a branch behind it, meaning that it has this one question associated with the answer that we selected. We need to provide the answer to this branch question before we can move on back to the main path and to the second question in the main path. This particular question type is true-false question type, meaning that we have only 2 answers offered, true and false. So this particular question has a branch behind the true answer, but does not have a branch behind the false answer. And the last question in this particular section is a multiple choice question. It's a very interesting one because it contains combinations of answers, meaning that if we select the first answer and the second answer, that's a correct combination. However, if we select the first answer and the answer number 3, that's not a correct combination. However, the combination of answer number 3 and 4 is also the correct combination, but it carries fewer points than the first correct combination. If we navigate to the next question, we can see that we also have a branch associated with a specific combination of answers that we selected. And once we provide the answer to this particular question, we can finish this section. And we are presented with the introduction for the last section. In this one, we will see the multimedia included in questions. We will see answer feedback, various question types that we haven't seen so far. We will see that each question has its own time, passing is mandatory, and question metadata is visible. So let's start this one. Over here we can see a fill in the blanks question. So we have these blanks and offered answers. You can also choose not to offer any answers, in which case you need to grade this question manually. And you can also choose not to answer the question to avoid negative points. Now, as you can see, the question metadata is also visible here. And we can now navigate to the next question. This is a single choice question, but it's very interesting because each of these options actually contains a feedback associated with it. So we are presented with a feedback associated with the answer that we selected, and then we can move on to the next question. And this particular question has an image associated with it. We can naturally enlarge the image, examine it, and provide the answer. But if we navigate to the next question, what happens is that the image is static. It stays there, only the question has changed. Why is that? Because you can create question groups. These question groups allow you to associate multiple questions with one single image or one single text or one single combination of image, text, audio, video, and these resources, let's say this image, will stay static as long as there are questions associated with it. However, if you want to associate a question with an image with a single question, this is how that actually looks like. So the image is inside of a panel for this particular question. You can naturally enlarge it, examine it, provide the answer, and move on to the next question. Over here we have the ordering type, meaning that we need to choose the correct order. And the last question type that I want to mention is the matching question type. So we need to match the elements from the left side of the screen with the ones on the right side of the screen. We can use these arrows or the drag and drop option. Now, before we submit this particular question and the entire exam actually, because we are on the last question, let's briefly navigate to the administrators panel once again. The administrator can navigate to the monitoring panel, and also the proctors can do that. They can choose to pause the session for all of the students or for a single student. We can even leave a message, wait for my signal. See what happens from the student's perspective. Wait for my signal. Okay, but from administrator's perspective or proctor's perspective, we can also examine the details about this particular test attempt. So we can see all of the activities time-stamped. We can see when the user started a question, started a test, started a section, everything. We can see the details, so we can see, okay, the first section was visited, the second was visited. He's currently in the last section. If we select to see more details, we can see that all of the questions were visited and that the student is currently located on the last question, which actually is the case. Now, if we choose to resume this session, a student can now submit this particular test. And the student can see if he passed or failed the test. This particular student passed the test because he passed the test as a whole, but also passed a section that has passing required enabled, even though he failed the one that didn't have mandatory passing, wasn't a critical section. And the first one was a demographic section, so the number of points achieved in that section are actually 0, and this section is not included when calculating the results of the test as a whole. If the test manager allows that, a student can see the details about the test section and all of the questions included in it, all of the answers that were available that the student selected, correct and incorrect answers displayed, and he can examine all of that, but the instructor can also choose not to share that information with the student and only to allow him to see the final score, and he can even choose not to share that with the student. From the administrator's perspective, however, we can see a lot more. So, first let's navigate to the list of all tests. Over here, let's go to the automated proctoring test. In the monitoring panel, we can choose the adequate testing session, and we can choose this particular student and examine their proctor report. What we get is the video recording of this particular test attempt. We can examine all of the suspicious behavior that might occur. So let's navigate to this red part of the video recording, see what happened there. So the student is not looking at the camera right now, and this is what the software noticed and actually notified him about it. If we navigate to this green part, we can see that everything is in order. Student is doing the test. Test taking panel is opened on his or her screen. But if we navigate to the second red part, play the video, we can see that student is not even in front of the camera. Let's go to the final red part, see what was going on over there. Okay, student is back in front of the camera, but what's going on? He's actually Googling something. He's checking something on the Wikipedia. So this is also noticed by the software and flagged as a suspicious behavior that you can examine in this video recording that is available after the test attempt. Now that's a proctoring report. Let's go back to the application to see all of the reports related to the test as a whole, or to the students, to the candidates, to different tests, to question pools. This particular test contains, as any other test, information about the candidates. Okay, so let's expand this. Over here we can see and choose the exact columns that we want, and we can export them. So for example, we can sort the students by their score. Okay, Ford Matthews achieved the highest score, passed the test. And we can choose, okay, we don't want to see, for example, the testing location and enabled from, enabled to. We don't want these columns. We don't want, for example, let's say when the test was started and finished. And we can choose to export this exact report now. We can also examine all of the reports individually. So we can see all of the questions from all of these test sections, and we can choose to overrule the automatic grading. Let's say that we will add 3 points for this particular question and leave a feedback. So we can leave a feedback, let's say partially correct. We can submit this. The total score will be automatically updated. We can go scroll back up, see that the score is now 83%. So we can examine the reports individually, we can compare the students to each other. Once we have verified a specific report, we have graded the questions, we can also choose to verify this report, and then we can export only the reports that are verified, only the test attempts that are verified. This is useful if you want to import those results into an LMS or another system, meaning that you do not want to export all of the attempts, only the ones that you verified, that are graded, and the score is actually the one that you want to share with external systems. Now you also may want to examine a summary report. Now this report is related to the test as a whole. You get some descriptive statistics, some central tendency measures like the average score, median. You get the standard deviation. You see a graphical representation of the pass-fail ratio and the points distribution as well. If we scroll down, we can see results broken down by testing sessions and testing locations as well. You can combine the location with a specific date. So you can say that I want the results on these locations, let's say throughout the March of the last year. And you can examine, for example, the average score. Let's see, the average score was lowest in Montreal. And the highest score on these locations, for example, the highest score in New York, that's Fort Matthews that we saw previously, 83.75%. We can see the lowest score on all of these locations, and the lowest score in Montreal is actually the lowest score overall. So we get a lot of useful information here, but if you want to examine the exact information that you need, you can scroll back up and navigate to the report builder. This option here allows you to specify the exact columns that you want to see in your report. So let's generate a report with all of these selected. We get a very, very large report that is perhaps better presented as an Excel file. So let's export it, and all of the tabular displays can be exported as an Excel file. Let's open it and see what we get. So we get this large report with all of this data. So we have data related to the users. Each row represents a test attempt, and we can see the information about the user that attempted that particular test at that particular time. We can see the exact session when the test was attempted. We can see the test related info. So we can see when the test was started, finished. We can see the time that was spent. We can see points achieved. We can see score, if the user passed or failed. We can see the grade that he achieved. You have grading scales that are fully customizable, and you can create any kind of grading schema that you need. But not only that, we can see the details about all of these test sections. And we can see the details about all of the questions in all of these sections. So let's see the details about the question number 3 in the test section number 1. So we see that a lot of students achieved the total number of points over here. Only 2 of them achieved 0 points. But we can see that this user that achieved the 0 points actually spent only 3 seconds on this answer, which is significantly less time spent on this answer than the average of the average time spent. And we can see over here that all of these users spent significantly more. And you get all of these details about all of the questions. And if you do not need so much data, you can just go back to the report builder and choose the exact combination of columns that you need. You can even save it and load it like we did right now. So we'll get only these 6 columns displayed. Let's see what we get. So we have username, first name, last name, we get the score, we get if the user passed or failed. But let's go a step further. Go back to the report builder and add a filter. So let's only choose to see the students that failed this exam. Not only that, they failed the exam and they're also males. So we can select gender equals to male. And we can display the report. We now only get the 4 males that failed this particular exam, and we see the exact columns that we wanted to see. A lot of other options you can see in the report section. So you can examine the statistics for each item, like the success ratio and the item reliability based on point by serial correlation. So you can identify the questions that do not belong in the test. So let's briefly navigate to that part of the application with the standard reports. You can navigate to the test reports, choose the item reliability report, select a test. For example, let's select initial exam demo. And we get the success ratio for all of these items, but we also get the item reliability, meaning the correlation with the test as a whole. We may want to consider excluding the questions with the lowest correlation with the test as a whole. But not all of the reports are test related. We can see the reports related to the users. For example, we can see in the user reports, we can see the audit trail. And over here, we can see all of the events that occurred in the system. We are constantly expanding this module for standard reports. So if you do not see any report that you want to see or want to use, you can just send us an email and we'll include it in our roadmap. Keep in mind that all of the activities in the system are time-stamped and they are stored in the database, so it's very straightforward process of extracting that from the database and displaying it in the application. Now, the module for creating surveys and managing surveys is very similar, almost exact, to the module for managing tests. The one difference is that surveys do not have correct and incorrect answers. They only have answer weights associated with their answers, and they can also carry 0 points if you just want to gather data and not use it for any kind of categorization of students and survey participants. Training courses, as I mentioned, allow you to completely customize the learning experience of the students through a step-by-step process. So if we open one of these training courses, we can see basic info about it. We can see the candidates and their progress. And we can see all of the steps defined for this particular training course. You can have as many steps as you want, and we have 3 in this example here. So we have a first step with 2 attachments. We have 3 more associated with the second step and one other PDF associated with the last step. Now, a student needs to go through each of these steps and pass the test associated with each step in order to move on to the next step. In this particular example, we have this multimedia demo test associated with the last step, but we can also associate a test with each of these steps. Usually you have a training course with several steps, each with its own test, and in the last step and in the last test of the last step you have a test with a certificate that basically ties a training course with a certificate. Also, you may wanna configure the system settings and white label the entire application. So you can go to System Preferences, change the messages that you see in the application, change the logo, change the favicon. All of these parameters are modifiable. You can also change the notifications that you see. You can choose which notifications are enabled, which of them are disabled, and you can choose to modify the message that will be sent to the students. Also, you can navigate to the theme module and use custom colors in the application. With this, we have covered all of the main functionalities related to the tests in YouTestMe GetCertified. We briefly covered the surveys module and the training courses module, as well as the users module and the reports section. We also covered a little bit of the system section, and I want to thank you for your attention and hope that you liked our application.